What's up, folks? Welcome to another episode of the Compulsive Podcast, or Videocast if you're watching this on YouTube. I have a regular on the show here. Name is going to be familiar with you all, and a very good friend of mine, Leo Dion. How you doing, Leo? How's it going, buddy?
Good to see you and hear you, Peter. Welcome. Happy New Year. Happy
New Year to you. Yes, we are here. The year of the headset is what they will put in the record books, right?
Yeah,
maybe.
We'll see. We'll see on February 2nd. So yeah,
it's as good as here, right? And maybe we'll talk about that later. How it just appeared out of nowhere, like, oh, by the way, it's coming out next month.
Yeah.
But we want to talk about a project of yours here, an app that you've got out and that I've been playing around with. Very useful app as well for developers, Bushel. And we're just going to dive right into this here. So give us an overview of Bushel, what it does and what it is.
Absolutely. So I've always been interested. Well, one of the things I was telling the story of is, like, it's cool to develop for the Mac because you don't have to deal with like having to debug on a different device. You can just debug it on your own machine. But the issue I've run into is I cannot set it up, and like I can't reset simulator in Mac OS. Like, there is no ability to do that. I can't just throw up a Mac quickly and test an app with a specific configuration without like breaking something, right? Yep. So that's kind of the genesis of the idea behind Bushel. Was I wanted an iOS simulator for Mac OS. On top of that, like, I've had a lot of situations where clients had an old version of Xcode. They like hadn't touched their code base in years and wanted you to fix something, and like it's just a pain in the neck to do. And I wanted a quick and easy way to do that. And that's kind of where Bushel came from. I mean, I had done some stuff with like VirtualBox and Parallel, well, mostly VirtualBox, honestly. And it just wasn't a great experience. It works, but it's not really focused for like developers in our space. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a good-looking, developer-focused VM app for macOS, iOS developers, or even people, like, I've had issues where I've had a client who needed me to set up a development script so they can get developers up and running, and they wanted to like install certain apps, and like I wanted to be able to do that on a Mac and be able to refresh it and try it again without having to, like, I want that clean install experience. And have it working that way. And so if you're building a script too, I think this is great. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, it's obviously very quickly the immediate comparisons that come up is VMware, Parallels, all the other ways of doing these things.
Yeah.
And the problem with a lot of those is that they have to try their best to cater for many different scenarios, right?
Right.
Like, I've done this, and I know other folks have done this. For example, you install a virtual machine, your host of choice, for Windows, so you can play games on your Mac and things like that. And the problem with that is they all enable for that to work. They have to be very generic and sort of meet many different requirements, as opposed to something that is squarely dedicated to saying, look, we want to give you Mac convenience, Mac performance in a VM on a Mac. And people would be forgiven at first for thinking, well, why would you want a virtual machine of the same machine? But you raise a very good point, which is we often, especially as developers, right, we have all these fancy tools, all these customizations, all these things running in the background, scripts, customized terminals, all these kind of scenarios that are actually really bad for testing, for example. And the best way to do this, like you say, is give me a straight up install of say, some flavor of Mac OS that better simulates the real world scenario for most users. And, yes, there are other ways you can do this, but they're all very involved. And again, it's a whole bunch of files and all sorts of things. What I found that I liked about Bushel is it's a case of, make me a Mac VM of this. Okay, that was it. And it's done and good to go. And like you say, if you need to do another one and just a reset, it's that quick as well, right?
Right. So, a couple of things I wanted to touch upon is, like, one thing I was just thinking about is, like, if you have a Linux machine, and I don't think this is quite a thing on the Mac, but, like, I've had Linux machines as Linux desktop machines, and, the kids will want to play a game, and there's, like, a specific tool set up to play Windows games on Linux, and, like, that's kind of what I'm trying to do with Bushel here. Like, yeah, okay, you can run Wine, right, and set Wine up and all that crap, but there's no easy way to, like, specifically just play a game on Linux that runs on Windows. And here, like, I have a very specific use case, VM app for developers who are in the macOS space. And the thing you bring up about, like, being able to reset and, like, so I take advantage of snapshots. Essentially, I use the file snapshot feature that's built into macOS and APFS. And I'm using that so that way you can take snapshots of a VM at a specific time and roll back or export or do whatever you want based on that snapshot. So I kind of think of it like save states, if anybody's familiar with what that means. And that's kind of the idea behind it, is just being able to rewind and fast forward and go back and, like, do whatever you need to do to, like, customize your machine and roll back in case you made any, boo-boos on the way.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the other beauty of this too, right? Is, if you do something and it goes horribly wrong, or you mess something up and you're testing a script and something horrible happens, is, okay, you know what? You've not ruined your host machine. Just delete the VM and start over. Right. And, that is so important, because I was trying to think, like, the other options, right? And I know that every year, probably I'm not the only one that does this. New Mac OS comes out, the new betas and everything else. And, your options are, one, install it on my main machine. Folks, don't ever do that. It's a bad plan. Or it used to be, in my case, okay, I'm going to install it on an external drive and everything that comes with that. But even that's not so easy to do now compared to how it used to be so easy to do. And so something, again, like virtual machines is like, great. If I presumably, let's take this year, for example, right? There's going to be a new version of Mac OS coming. But as the betas, like beta 1, beta 2, and so on come out, you can take this, because of the way your system works, I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, but because you can take that image file.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could
it
do
takes the
all
IPSW file. You can just download it right off of the Apple developer page. I mean, you could download the beta for whatever the macOS beta is today and, like, install it in Bushel and try it out. Obviously, there won't be as many changes as you might see with...
Well, we hope not, right?
Right. With what comes out
we don't want breaking
year.
Changes this late, yeah. Now, here's a question for you, because I didn't try this. So I'm on, as like most folks, I'm guessing at this point, I'm on the Apple architecture, right? Presumably I cannot install like an Intel version of the OS, right? Because it would take advantage of the Mac hardware.
And it only works on Apple Silicon. So if you were to install Bushel on an Intel machine, it wouldn't work. I'm actually talking to Apple about seeing how I can get it removed for Apple machines, because the virtualization framework requires Apple Silicon to run.
Okay, which, let's be honest, it's really, at this point, probably not a problem. I do know some folks that have Intel machines, and I think even they've realized, look, you're going to have to step up at some point, right?
Right. We're 3 years in here, yeah.
That's it. It's like, you got to... Even Apple has upgraded all of their machines at this point to the M chips, right?
Yeah. And I think, like, a lot of CI machines are moving over to Silicon, too. So, yeah, totally.
Yep. Because it's so fast, and, I mean, at this point, why wouldn't you, right?
Right.
Give it probably, another year, and you probably won't have any options at that point. It's like, nope.
I think this year or next year may be the first one that doesn't support Intel. I think we're getting close to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the transition's been good while we're talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So the beauty of this app really is spin. And, again, this is me speaking from my experience, trying it out. Spin it up quickly, use it, power it down, destroy it if you need to. Or in my case, the way I do it is I just keep like, okay, here's a pristine install. Keep that as a like you say, do a snapshot or whatever. So I don't even have to do the install every time. I can literally just say, hey, make me another one of those.
Yeah.
And any customizations I may have done to go with that, it's already set up. The one thing that I find that with all of these, and I did test this with your one as well, and it's not unfortunately, I think this is an Apple thing, and you might be able to shed some light on this, because I don't understand, in any kind of virtual machine, you cannot log in to the App Store.
Yes.
And I'm sure there must be some reason for that, but I don't know.
You cannot log in into any of Apple's systems through a VM. So Apple ID doesn't work, App Store doesn't work, any stuff with like developer, like where you sign in with Apple ID. Like if you go to Xcode, you want to download your certificates. No, you can't do that through Xcode. Yeah, it's a challenge, and I've been researching it. It's like my white whale, I guess, of like things I could fix or work around.
Does Apple explain why this is the thing?
No, but I think it's by design. There was a Quinn answer, Eskimo the Quinn, or Quinn the Eskimo had a question answer regarding that, and it sounded to me like it's by design, probably because Apple, like people, like go for it, file a feedback on it, but Apple usually returns it back as designed. Yeah, so it's kind of my gut feeling. Is there a way around it? I doubt it. But we'll see. It's like I said, it's my white whale. If I can figure that out, that'd be great. But we'll see.
Oh, see, where I was going with this was, this is the one thing, well, maybe there's others, but I've never got past this one. This is the one thing that prevents me from having a scenario that I'd like where, I can't do like I used to do with, like I said, the older versions. I would have a completely pristine setup, kind of what I would call an external drive with like the PETA image, like everything set up exactly how I want it. And if something goes wrong or I want to start again, I reclone that back to the internal drive, machine's up and running. And I would love to be able to do that with virtual machines. But, ironically, because I wanted to embrace the Mac OS App Store, so many apps I use are in there. Therefore, I can't use them in a VM. Do you know what I mean? So it prevents me from having kind of my panic scenario virtual image at this point.
Right. Totally. That totally makes sense. Or just like, we're looking into iOS development as a future feature for Bushel, so you can run. And like we're testing that scenario out, making sure the USB connections work. And making sure you could just like run on your iPhone, because who knows if you can even get the certificates you need, like if you can't sign in to Xcode. So yeah, we're looking into all those situations right now.
Interesting, because I was going to ask you about that. Was this with Bushel and that? Do I have, when I'm running a virtual machine of the Mac, putting aside the App Store issues, do you get pass-throughs for all of the Apple hardware, or are there some restrictions that it's like, nope, this isn't going to work for you? Or is it really sort of like truly having your second Mac sitting
We're
there?
looking into, we're looking into that right now. We looked at some stuff with Clipboard that didn't go anywhere. But the next thing right now is just USB. And then we're going to add file sharing soon. So that's going to be something we're going to set up. Yeah, it's like basically a way to do a central place for sharing files. And then I'm trying to think what else I wanted to do. What else was the other thing? I mean, we've had some requests for like custom display resolutions.
I can see that being useful. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, that's definitely something we're looking into as well.
Nice. Yeah, because as soon as you say that, I'm thinking to myself, when I do like tutorial videos and things like that, if I could have, like run a Mac VM and say have the screen set to, 1024, something like that, and then just capture it at that. I don't have to do any scaling or any worrying about that. That would be perfect for that. Yeah.
Yep.
And live streaming too. It's kind of at the moment, it's like, oh, do I live stream my whole desktop and hope that I'm not exposing something to the world that I didn't want to? Or if I could, again, have a VM with a window of a specific size, tell the capture software, go grab that and be safe.
Time for a break.
Hey, everybody, it's Peter Whittam here from the Compile Swift podcast. I want to tell you about SetApp. SetApp is a service that provides a subscription fee of just $10 a month, and you get access to over 200 Mac applications, and it's also available now on iOS as part of that deal. I use the service because it just has a ton of really good first-rate apps that I use all the time. And for me, it's invaluable as a developer to have access to tools for things like APIs, for planning projects, writing emails, writing documentation. And you can get all of these things, including database apps, all of that kind of stuff, right there on the SetApp service for just $10 a month. You can use as many or as few applications as you need. If you're interested in checking this out, go to peterwhittam.com, peterwhittam.com/SetApp, SETAPP, and you can see the details there. And it's got a link that you can go over and start using the service and see how it works out for you. I strongly recommend this to every Mac user.
Break time over.
It's
right.
And that's actually another aspect of this too that we should talk about. Having it run in a virtual machine like this, presumably you can, by default, if you want, be completely isolated. So whatever happens inside that virtual machine, you don't have to worry about your host machine, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's a big part of it, is just being able to, you can do whatever you want with your VM and not worry about like breaking anything on your host machine. So that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Especially useful for like research, whatever it may be, or these folks who have to sit and look at infected machines, and it's like, look, you can look at it in a VM and not worry about, getting
one of the
infected
things.
yourself.
So, like, one of the things that's both a use case and a future feature is developing like a guest tools app, so that way you can control all sorts of things in your VM from Bushel. Like SSH or file sharing or anything like that.
Nice.
And that's a great example of an app I want to build in the VM for the VM, because I don't want to like mess stuff up on my host machine if I accidentally do some admin thing. And that's definitely what I'm trying to do with the guest tools. That's kind of one of the next big things we're looking at doing, because I think that opens up a lot more features for users to be able to do stuff.
It becomes very meta at that point, doesn't it? Using the tools to
meta,
develop the tools, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, like that. Nice. So, we'll link, folks, we'll put lots of links in the show notes for this, but tell folks where they can go grab this.
You can go to getbushel.app. That's getbushel.app is the URL. And then from there, that'll take you to the App Store and all sorts of fun stuff about Bushel, the making of it, and different release notes and all that stuff.
As far as like a pricing structure on this, how does that work for those who are curious?
So it has it's free to use for most of the features, and then there is a in-app purchase that's available for a membership. So you can, if you get the pro version, right now it's priced at $11 monthly, or $65.99 for the annual membership. Obviously, we'll be adding more features throughout the year, but
sure.
Right now, metadata, so being able to give a name or like give a description on a snapshot, and then automatic snapshots is the other feature, where as you're using the app, as you're using the VM, it automatically uses a timer to take snapshots every however
Nice.
often you want to take it, which I think is a big deal.
Yeah.
And like it uses a specific API, so you can always delete these snapshots later pretty easily if they're taking up too much space. But yeah, those are the two big premium features that we have, and then we'll be adding more throughout the rest of the year.
Nice. Is it possible, and I didn't look this one up, but it strikes me as something now. Can I back up those snapshots to like an external drive or something like that?
You can export a snapshot into a new VM. You can do that.
Nice.
But the VM, the way the snapshots work is it uses special stuff in APFS, so I don't have access to like the actual file data. You wouldn't be able to export that per se, but you can export a snapshot into a VM and then use that kind of like a branch, right? Or a fork.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, awesome. So talk about building an app like this, because I would imagine it's a very different approach in some ways to just your everyday app, right? Because you're talking about an app to essentially manage an OS at this point, which is very different than, your average app that just runs, right? Talk to us about that. What fun did you have?
Well, let's talk about virtualization. So they've had this hypervisor framework out for quite some time on macOS, it looks like. But it's all C-level, and honestly, it's kind of intimidating and probably isn't maintained very much. And then a couple of years ago, I want to say 2 years? Yeah, 2 years, because it was the year Monterey came out. They released a virtualization framework, which is all Swift-based with Objective-C behind the scenes, which is, better than C-based, right? And I started dabbling into that, and it was actually really easy to get going once you figure out some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Honestly, that's not the hardest part. There's a few tricky things with concurrency. They want everything to run on the main thread with that stuff, but otherwise, as long as you say it's main actor, it works, right? So, that's fine. It's honestly the Swift UI stuff. One of the things I talked about in the article was that I had already started developing this after WWDC last year, and I was trying to support Monterey, and it was a challenge. Yeah. And I didn't lose interest. I just had more work than I can handle, and Bushel went by the wayside. And then when they came out with Swiftdata, I was like, okay, this is the thing that's going to make it a lot easier for me to build this app and use it. And because Peter, I had this thing using Combine and user defaults to store my data. It was it was awful.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I was looking, I didn't want to do core data because I knew core data wasn't going to be long for the world. And I wanted to store your VMs, your images, and all that stuff. And so I had this hacked thing together for my data. And then when Swiftdata, I was like, okay, good. I could throw all that crap out the window and start from scratch. And so, it uses a lot of Swiftdata to manage machines and access to machines and stuff. And it's all sandboxed. So that's another challenge there.
Yeah.
And just figuring out how to work with the sandboxing system. I could go on and on. They added a new snapshot feature this year, which was useless because you had to use a what are we on right now? Sonoma. You had to use a Sonoma VM, and nobody's going to want to use a Sonoma VM because part of the reason of using this app is to be able to use an old OS. So I don't even use the new API. I just end up using file snapshots, but it was interesting. I learned a lot of stuff, and working with SwiftUI all through that maze was interesting.
Well, I bet now the part that caught me there that stands out more than anything is using user defaults, because maybe and maybe I'm wrong, or maybe this is part of the problems that you hit. Was I always tend to think of user defaults as storing this, you got a little bit of data to store, use, and simple data, go with user defaults. But I would imagine you've got a pretty fair amount for something like this, right?
Oh, Peter, I was doing codable data structs and storing them in user data. It was awful. Or user defaults. It was awful. And it was just I was so against using core data. I went with this route. Honestly, I should have just went with Core Data, but now that Swiftdata's out, like that's what I'm going with, and that's worked really well to store all this information. It's not a lot by any means. It's pretty simple, honestly, but
okay,
it's just perfect.
But you got to
for that
manage
kind of,
it though,
right? And it's perfect for relational stuff, so that really helps a lot.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot right there. I feel like there could be a whole series of like, my pain with user defaults and doing this, right?
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah,
the code's bad. It's embarrassing.
So I can imagine when they first announced, Swiftdata, you were like, oh, thank goodness.
Right. Because we all knew something was going to come out, right? Even more so than like Swift UI, I feel like we've been waiting for Core Data alternative. Core Data's not bad by any means, but it definitely has a lot of Objective-C cruft to it. And with Swift Data, it's not, I wouldn't if you're already using Core Data, stick with Core Data. But I think next year, if you're starting a new app, I would totally go with Swift Data because I think there's a lot of weird concurrency things that are going on with Swift Data right now that they still have to work out.
All right, here it is. The one thing that I cannot do without every day, and that is my coffee. Anyone that knows me or anyone that's listened to any of my podcasts or anything else knows that I absolutely cannot operate without my coffee, and I love good coffee. So here's the deal. I'm going to give you one free bag of coffee by going to peterwhitham.com/coffee. There is a wonderful company out there that follows the fair trade practices, helps out a lot of independent roasters of all sizes, and the operation is simple. What you do is you're going to go to peterwhitham.com/coffee. You sign up there. You get a free bag of coffee sent to you. Yes, in return, they say thank you to me by giving me some coffee. But that's not the reason I'm doing this. The reason I'm doing this is because I have found so many good coffees that I just would never have come across, heard about, or experienced without this service. Trade Coffee is just fantastic. There are plenty of places out there. We all know them that supply coffee, good coffee. You can go to the store, get the coffee, but there is nothing better than discovering new independent roasters and supporting them, discovering new flavors of coffee, new grinds you can set it up. It's very smart. You tell it the kind of coffee you like, and over time it gets better and better as it trains in on your selections and your choices and gives you exactly the coffee you're looking for and recommending new ones that will be very similar. Every time I get a new packet of coffee, I go through and afterwards I try the coffee. I go through the service and I say, look, I loved this coffee. I thought this coffee was okay. Or I say, look, this was really not for me. And every time I do that, it makes the service a little more accurate on the next selection for me. So again, just go to peterwhitham.com/coffee. Get your free bag of coffee today. If you're a coffee lover, you're going to really appreciate this service. I have been using it for years at this point and thoroughly recommend it. Well, if you're ready for it, I'd like to move on and talk about Swiftdata because
let's do it.
You are one of a small group of people I know that have been working with it, and I know some folks working on some courses. And you and I were talking before the recording, and as folks who have been following my other episodes recently know, I took my first steps into Swiftdata over the holidays. I just felt the pressure. It was one of those. It was holiday time. The pressure was off. I could make something that's a complete disaster and not worry about it. And I thought this is the perfect time for Swiftdata.
So can I tell you, you want to know what's even more fun than learning Swiftdata? Learning Swiftdata as it changes. Try that out.
Oh, I bet.
That was one of my biggest challenges was I went into Swiftdata as soon as the first beta came out. And, it works. And then you try beta 2. Oh, it crashes. Okay, fix it. Beta 3. Oh, it crashes. Oh, fix this. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a blast. That was a blast.
Was this like Swift 1, 2, and 3 all over again? Is that what you went through?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
And they definitely changed some attributes. Obviously, this is also their guinea pig for macros, right? Because everything's a macro here.
Yep.
So attributes would change. we'll get into the biggest thing that kept changing, and it's still an issue with it. But
Okay.
For me, and this I did this episode, this really great episode, 2 episodes with Stuart Lynch, and we're talking about learning new stuff. And one of the things is you come into any new API. I've done this so many times now, where you have this preconception of how it's supposed to work based on how you've done stuff in the past. And for me, I think for some people it would have been, oh, this is how I use Postgres, or this is how I use MySQL, or whatever, or core SwiftLite, right? And for me, I've actually done database stuff in Swift. In my case, it's all been Vapor and Fluent, and doing stuff that way. And they have a really good system for migration and models and queries and all that stuff. It's awesome. And so I already know this really good API for talking to databases. And then you have Swiftdata, which is Apple's way of doing it, and they're doing it with this new thing called macros. And it's okay, well, you got to do this, you do this, you have to do this. Parents always are optional, but I don't want a parent to be optional. I want a parent to have to be there. But no. Apple says it has. I was okay, whatever. Just get into work. And this is how you define relationships. It's you just have to relearn it the way Apple does it. And for me, the biggest challenge, honestly, comes down to concurrency. The way concurrency is set up in Swiftdata is it's different. And it's just not the way it doesn't do a lot of hand holding, and at the same time I feel like it's a little bit guiding you towards the wrong direction. I'm just thankful we're not at Swift 6 yet. Hopefully not this year, because Swift 6 is going to be huge. And it's going to throw a lot of curveballs when it comes to concurrency, because Swiftdata is just, it's not ready for concurrency right now. I'll be honest, all the Swiftdata code is wrapped in main actor because I was just sick and tired of dealing with all these issues. And it's currently what I'm doing there right now is trying to unwrap all the main actor Swiftdata stuff, because I want a better user experience.
And that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things that struck me too, was, I was like, oh, really? We're going to do all of this on main actor? And I thought, well, I hope that goes smoothly,
Yeah.
To be fair, I didn't do anything massive. So I'll dive into sort of how I got into it here. I didn't want to do anything too complicated. And, again, I wanted to do something that I could almost just sort of say, well, that's interesting, and walk away from it. Thinking to myself, maybe this year we'll get a whole bunch of Swiftdata stuff at WWDC. And then, of course, I remembered, no, we'll probably get a whole bunch of headset stuff. But I noticed that, Paul Hudson, Hacking with Swift, had done a live stream. And I thought, well, hey, I'm going to sit and watch some of that. So that's what I did. Just to, it was get a grasp of the basics and to see if I could relate it to what I know about core data. The good thing is I didn't really have to do that. So that's the good news. But it did become very apparent very quickly. Yes, it was now I see why we were in a hurry to get the macros out the door, right. With everything being macros. But then I realized too, actually I get it. This is saving me an awful lot of work and an awful lot of code if I just trust in the macros and Swiftdata was doing what it should.
Yeah. And at least with Xcode, you can see what's going on underneath. It's not all.
That was the beauty of it, was when, I realized oh, you know what? If I'm not sure, I can actually kind of go in there and look, and not only learn from it, but understand. And interestingly, that helped me solve a problem, because I spoke about this on a previous episode. My idea was a basic sort of simple one-to-many kind of relationship, right? Very start there. And I thought I was being clever. And firstly, let's talk about the models, right? How you simplicity of building the model was fantastic. But I didn't read the documentation as far as don't do this. And I set up what I thought was an easy answer for something, which was an enum. And that was a bad plan. It was a bad plan in that I didn't know at the time that Swiftdata and enums are not friends at this time. But also, the errors that it was giving me in Xcode that turned out to be the enum that was the issue, well, the error didn't say anything about that. The error was completely different. And this was on a live stream. I spent about 30, 40 minutes with some very knowledgeable folks in the chat room. None of us, like, what does this mean? You know.
So what did you end up doing, if you mind asking? Because I have a workaround for that.
Well, my workaround, I guess it works, but it's one of those where, you say to yourself, this just doesn't feel right. So what I did was, instead of having an enum, I just created another very simple model with two properties, just an ID and the string that basically I needed. The enum itself, what it was a payment type. So you had a drop down in the UI, and there'd be like Apple Card, credit card, so on and so on. Right? Perfect use case, I thought, for an enum until I realized it wasn't. So I just made a simple model with that and then piped in the data. So instead of having the enum, I basically ended up with a very simple list. But the beauty of what impressed me with Swiftdata was, it happily mapped that back to the other model, which was like the actual record, right?
Oh, okay, cool.
So you had a record that was like, pick one, Apple Card, right? But then you may have 5 records that related back to the Apple Card, and I could just list them by saying, show me everything with Apple Card. Make sense?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I thought this was one of those like, okay, now I'm about to prove why you can't use this, and I'll break it. So I deleted the record that had Apple Card, and dang it if Swiftdata didn't do the right thing and just set them all those records back to like the first default of select a card. So
nice.
Yeah, I was like, damn, that's impressive.
Yeah. So the thing I end up doing in those cases is just storing the raw value of the enum in the database, and then
I tried that and it didn't work for me.
So I make the raw value the actual string, right? That's stored in the database, and then I create a computer property, basically off of that with the real enum.
Now I think about it.
Because then you could create a transient. You could create a transient property too, where it's not stored in the database.
Yeah, I think I was using the raw value to display. I don't think I was
because you were doing
Swift
UI stuff too.
I was doing Swifty things. Yeah, and that like you said, that was one of those like be prepared to forget what you know.
Right.
I was thinking like old core data ways. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And as soon as I just let all that go and again trusted in the macros, I was very pleasantly surprised at how many things it just took care of it, and it was fine. Every time I expected to crash it, it didn't.
One thing I want to talk about is there's barely any Combine in this app. I'm a big fan of Combine, and
talk about that. Yeah, because I know you are a big fan.
Yeah, I built it with very little. There is some Combine from my old code I did 2 years ago. It's like the downloading part, but pretty much everything else is all observation based. So a lot of did set. That's kind of how I did it. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I think
you mentioned that. Do you feel that that's better going forward, or would you rather...
I'm maintaining old apps that use Combine, and what I'm running into is it's really hard to trace what's going on. Talk to me in a year to see how observation is any better than that. But that's like kind of the issue I've run into with Combine.
Interesting.
So we'll see.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to mention that because what I ended up doing a lot is like, so I use a lot of window groups where you pass in a binding, and I'd have to listen to the binding to see if it changes, and then let the observed object know on the view. I actually write an article.
Something.
I'm writing an article about it.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So like basically, like binding can change. Like if you open the app and I say open this VM, then I close the app, and then it'll try to open the window, but it won't pass anything to it at first, and then it will pass the information about the VM. And so now we've got to like update the view and the view is reading the observed object. So I ended up setting up this like on change. I use on change to like listen to changes to the binding and then let the observed object know. The reason I want to point that out was like I do the same thing with queries. So like you have a query and you have an observed object, and then it'll listen to changes in the query and let the observed object know so that it can like let's say snapshots, right? I need a specific, I need to take the data from the database and turn it into something that's actually viewable in SwiftUI. And then I can do that with the on change. That's a pattern I use a lot. And that seems to be working pretty well. So I'm pretty happy with that.
And I would imagine that's pretty responsive and pretty quick too, right?
Right, exactly.
And like you say, better chance of it being internally up to date, for want of a better way of putting it.
Right.
And keeping up with itself, as opposed to, you could be, you might think you've got one state, but you're a fraction of a millisecond too early and you've got the other one or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. All right. Yeah, we'll check back and I'll just message you one day and I'll just be like, combine. Yes? No?
I know. There's going to be a talk next year on it. There's going to be a whole group of talks about it. Vision Pro is totally built on Combine. Like, what?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Combine has come back and you're good to go again. And then you can rewrite it again, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Well, I'm conscious of the time here. Is there anything we haven't covered here in this episode we want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we covered it. I mean, yeah, people download the app. It's free. Bug fixes are coming out like crazy. If you have any suggestions, we have a Slack for it too.
Great.
So if you want to invite, DM me. I'm on Twitter at LeoGDion and Mastodon, LeoGDion at c.im. So hit me up and let me know. I'd love to hear more feedback.
Great. And we'll put links for it all in the show notes. Folks, absolutely give it a try. It's another one of those where it's, I look at these things and the folks that I have come on the podcast, and these are, it's a podcast for developers, and it's mostly about development tools, right? And so, it is very much a case of why wouldn't you download it and try it? At the very least, give it a go, right? But I think, like so many times, once you actually try tools like this, suddenly you realize all those use cases for yourself, right? It's like when I was talking with Adam Wolf and we were talking about Muse and Developer Duck and how it has radically changed the way that I do some things for the better, because I never had a tool that did it the way it does it for me to realize that this is so much better for me. And I think that this is another one of those tools in that, if nothing else, being able to spin up an entire operating system for whatever reason you need it, and it goes wrong, and just delete it without your machine going down and carrying on. I mean, that in itself is priceless. All right, well, fantastic. Well, Leo, my friend, yes.
I should probably plug, I have a podcast of my own.
Show.
And you can check out my company, Bright Digit. I have all the links to the YouTube channel and the podcast. We have our next interview with Martin Lasik, who has a YouTube channel.
Hey,
we'll be talking
say
about
hi
game
to
development. Yeah, we'll do. We're talking about game development and building in public and all that fun stuff. So
I hang out on his live streams.
Yeah.
Oh, you are? Cool. Yeah, no, I hang out on his live streams. He's a lot of fun and a smart guy. And say hi for me. He does a lot of great stuff. Awesome.
Yeah, he's going to be awesome. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and folks, absolutely. Check out the Empower Apps archives. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Folks, we will leave it there. There's going to be a whole bunch of links in the show notes for you. As far as myself and this podcast, you know what to do. Compile Swift everywhere. Say nice things about it. I would greatly appreciate that. With that, folks, we will catch up in the next episode.